Indiana News Desk is made possible in part by Smithville, fiber internet, security solutions, and voice in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Mallard Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. lawmg.com. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana News Desk. Bloomington's 2 high schools operate on different schedules, but district officials are considering a plan to create a common schedule beginning next year.
Both North and South students do not wish for this change to happen, and we are desperate to offer any other solution.
MCCSC says it will form focus groups to collect input before making a decision. A pedestrian bike accident on the Beeline Trail amplified the difficulties Bloomington is facing as it tries to keep everyone safe on mixed-use paths.
I would say as a transportation planner, our recommendation is to separate out modes. A challenge with the Beeline is there isn't an alternative.
Bloomington police say citations to bikers are rarely issued. And we take a look behind the state's education numbers that show a high rate of chronic absenteeism by Hoosier students. We'll have these stories plus the latest news from across the state right now on Indiana News Desk. Welcome to Indiana News Desk. I'm Joe Wren. Bloomington's 2 high schools operate on different schedules. Bloomington High School South is on a trimester schedule. Bloomington High School North is on a block schedule. District officials are considering plans to create a common schedule for both schools starting next year. But as Isabella Vesperini reports, students and parents are concerned about the potential change, and they say the district isn't hearing them out.
Scarlett Irwin is a sophomore at Bloomington High School South. She likes the flexibility the trimester schedule gives her. She has 5 classes a day for 1 hour each.
There's lots of different classes you can take. There's more freedom. And then, more credits, which is always nice.
The proposed changes would result in each high school operating under a semester schedule. Each day, there would be 7 40-minute periods.
I think it's a very terrible idea. All that would lead to is just a bunch of burnt out students and teachers.
Both high schools have a designated period during the day for students to catch up on work and get help with homework or assignments. That would also potentially go away with the new schedule. Irwin is frustrated. She says it seems the decision has already been made.
It was also kind of sad and disappointing, the fact that I learned about it through a student-ran newspaper, when this is a decision that, would affect thousands of students and teachers and parents' lives daily.
MCCSC declined an interview, but said in a letter to families that no decision has been made and the district is in the research phase. At a school board meeting last week, it was a packed house as students, faculty, and parents showed up looking for answers.
I beg you to please listen to the students that have gathered here today to protest this possible schedule change. Both North and South students do not wish for this change to happen, and we are desperate to offer any other solution rather than the 7-period semester schedule. When North and South are both united, you know that is very serious.
That's Alexa Aparicio. She's also a sophomore at South. She says it felt like her comments fell on deaf ears, and the board members weren't even paying attention.
The president of the Board of Educators was on his phone during at least 2 of the meetings 2 of the speeches that I listened to. Superintendent Oswald was laughing and whispering with his seatmate.
A lot is on the line for Aparicio. She wants to graduate early. She would have to restructure her classes or take classes over the summer. It would also be harder for her to stay involved in clubs like Women in Politics and Latino Club Amigos at South. It's the same story for Eva Holden. She's a junior at North. She's involved in a lot of activities: Best Buddies, Unified Track, bowling. She also has a part-time job.
I feel like I wouldn't be able to work as at all or as much. And yeah, it's already hard to balance life and school. And so I feel like that would just make it a lot harder, especially with 7 classes a day and 1 night to do homework.
It just would basically give me no time to do any extracurriculars, and it would basically just like force me to immerse myself in my schoolwork.
Aparicio and Irwin are collaborating with students at Bloomington High School North to stage a walkout.
Everyone should just do everything they can, whether that's signing petitions or doing walkouts, as well as also just informing themselves, which is, I think, the most important thing. We cannot let these decisions go by without making sure our voices are heard.
In its letter to parents, MCCSC said the changes are necessary to minimize disparities among the high schools and make various programs and opportunities more equally accessible. MCCSC announced this week that it would form student, teacher, and family focus groups to review student surveys and collect input on the potential schedule change. The student focus groups will begin the week of October 9th and will welcome students from the 4 high schools in town. The teacher focus groups will begin the week of October 16th, and the family and community focus groups begin the week of November 6th. With reporter Emma Herway, I'm Isabella Vesperini.
About 40% of Hoosier students missed 10 or more school days last year. Nearly 1 in 5 were absent for at least 18 days. That's according to data the State Board of Education released this week. Student absences have been on the rise since the onset of the COVID pandemic. Although Indiana's latest numbers show slight improvements, absentee rates last school year were still 8% higher than before the pandemic. The highest chronic absenteeism rates came from the most vulnerable students, including those who were homeless, in foster care, or struggling with mental health issues.
I think this is really a rally cry for us to look at our parents, families, caregivers, and also our community leaders to come up with some solutions that might help.
We're joined now by Indiana Capitol Chronicle reporter Casey Smith for more on the state's report. Welcome to the show. Hi, Casey.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I gave a few numbers there, but how many kids are we really talking about that are chronically absent?
Yeah, so this new data is from the 2022-2023 academic year. That 1 in 5 number, about 20% of Hoosier students who were labeled chronically absent, that's equal to about 221,000 students. That 40% number, and that's of students who missed 10 or more days of school last school year, which labels them as habitually absent. That's over 400,000 Hoosier students of school-aged kids across the state.
Well, unsurprisingly, the most vulnerable students, of course, the ones that are most affected. Do you have any more on that? Any discrepancies, rural, urban, between race?
So based on these latest numbers, chronic absenteeism and just absenteeism in general, it is affecting schools across all Indiana geographies. It's not just the rural schools. It's not just the urban schools. It's not even just schools in more low-income areas. It's really across the state. That being said, like you mentioned, students who do face challenges like homelessness, students who are in foster care, they are much more likely to be recording higher numbers of days missed from school. But the same is said for students who come from low-income families, students who are dealing with mental health. There's also a hypothesis that's still being investigated by state officials that districts where there's a lack of transportation, school buses, that's also a contributing factor, not a sole factor, but that's causing absenteeism to be worse.
Yeah. So how do Indiana's numbers stack up nationally?
So there are numbers still being collected across all sorts of states, but from what we can tell so far, about 25% of students were labeled chronically absent last year. So again, chronically absent being missing 10% of the school days during the school year or more. That number has been rising since the pandemic. Indiana's number for 2022-23 was obviously a little bit below that mark, but not by much. Our neighboring states, they're also pretty high. Illinois and Ohio, they came in around 30% of students marked as chronically absent. Michigan was closer to 40%, Kentucky about 28%. A lot of states across the country, like I said, their numbers are continuing to go up. Indiana, a little bit below that national average, but still highly concerning.
So we just got about 30 seconds left, but what is the state doing to counteract chronic absenteeism?
There's not been much of a statewide response yet, but it looks like that's about to change. One of the big things that state officials talked about this week is a new dashboard to flag at-risk students to try and stop chronic absenteeism from happening before it does. We know that state leaders are also trying to rally up parents, community members to try and come up with different solutions to try to get parents more engaged with their students and making sure they're getting to school. There's also some talk right now, obviously, about the state legislature acting in the spring. We don't know what that could look like. One idea that's been proposed is harsher penalties and accountability for parents whose students aren't getting to school.
Casey, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
We're joined now by Callie Lichter for the latest headlines from around the state. Hi, Callie.
Hi, Joe. IU Health is expanding the services it offers in Nashville with plans to open a new health center next summer. The new center will offer orthopedic and primary care and have walk-in hours. It comes in response to demand for services in the community.
It really helps meet the needs of community members that might not be able to schedule an appointment during normal business hours and or just have an emergent need that they need to walk into an office and receive care.
Construction on the new health center is expected to begin this month. Indiana abortion clinics and hospitals performed fewer than 2,000 abortions from April through June, the lowest since 2019, according to a new quarterly report from the Indiana Department of Health. During that period, the state's near-total abortion ban was being held up in the courts. It went into effect in August. The number is in contrast to second-quarter abortions during the 3 previous years, which each topped 2,000. About 81% of abortions were performed on Hoosiers. The Capital Improvement Board, created to oversee the proposed Monroe County Convention Center expansion project, took a small step forward this week. The board selected officers to serve until the end of the current term in January. The board was created in July by the Monroe County Commissioners after a battle with Bloomington Mayor John Hamilton for what kind of entity should run the project.
This is an important step, an important date for us, and I think it's important for the community to see that we have a chair and leadership in charge here.
Former Ivy Tech Chancellor John Weikart was named the board's chairman and local businessman Doug Bruce the vice chairman. The current 6-member board will choose a 7th member by the end of this year. The city of Bloomington passed a deer feeding ban to reduce human-deer conflict. While there is no official mandate to report deer feeding, the city encourages Hoosiers to alert the animal shelter. Feeding a deer will result in first-time fine of $50.
If the officer's trying to work with them, if they were not aware of the ordinance, they'll give them a few days to clean everything up and stop, and if they continue, then a fine would be levied.
The fine will be doubled for second and subsequent offenses if the deer feeding attempts happen within the same year. If you see someone feeding a deer, Sauter recommends reporting it on the City of Bloomington's Animal Care and Control website. The president of Indiana State University is leaving at the end of the school year. Deborah Curtis became the first woman to lead the university when she took the job in 2018. Curtis has spent 38 years in higher education.
I could not think of any better way to complete this last chapter of my career than to serve in this role at ISU and move on to retirement.
Curtis's contract was set to expire in 2025 after extensions during the COVID-19 pandemic. The ISU trustees are planning to conduct a national search for Curtis's replacement. Some Indiana borrowers could see thousands of dollars added to their state income tax if they're eligible for student loan forgiveness. The IRS doesn't tax most types of student loan forgiveness, but in 2021, Indiana passed a provision that requires certain borrowers to pay adjusted gross income tax on the balance of federally forgiven loans between 2021 and 2025. Borrowers will not have to pay state taxes on loans forgiven due to total and permanent disability or certain types of repayment plans. Farmer sentiments declined for the second month in a row in September thanks to weakening crop prices and high production costs. The Ag Economy Barometer Index fell 9 points on producer concerns about their current and future prospects of their farms. Of the 400 farmers surveyed, 1/3 says high input costs remain their #1 concern. A fourth chose rising interest rates and lower crop and livestock prices. Traffic patterns along Bloomington's 7-lane bicycle lane will soon change. The City Council this week approved reinstalling all-way stop signs at 4 intersections along the protected bike lane on 7th Street. Bicycle advocates say the amendment will make 7th Street less safe for bikers because they will also have to stop at the stop signs.
The proposed amendment is all but certain to increase tensions, collisions, and unpredictability between bicyclists and motorists on 7th Street.
The signs were removed during the construction of the 7 line in 2021, and Joe, in 2022, there were a dozen crashes involving bikes or scooters at the intersection of 7th and Dunn Streets.
And I was just getting used to going through 7th without those. I have to relearn again.
Me too.
Thanks, Callie. Coming up next on Indiana News Desk. Bloomington leaders are facing questions about how to keep pedestrians, bikers, and scooter users safe on mixed-use paths. And a new store opening on Bloomington's east side combines vintage clothing and a space to mingle with adoptable cats. These stories and more right here on Indiana News Desk.
I'm originally from Mumbai, India. I also grew up in Singapore before moving to the US for my undergrad. The exciting thing about doing a master's here at IU was that I found WTIU, WFIU. I got to help produce Indiana News Desk, which started off just helping the producer, and then it led to some weeks when he was out, me producing the show. Having people on the team that have been doing this so long, that really helps because, you know, they catch those mistakes and they teach you how to not make those mistakes again. Sarah Whitmire, who's the news bureau chief at Indiana Public Media, connected me with Gretchen Frazee, who works at PBS NewsHour. So she used to work here at Indiana Public Media. She ended up saying, you know, why don't you apply? So that's how I ended up getting a broadcast assistant position at PBS NewsHour. Hi, I'm Kayan Tara. I really am grateful for my experience here at Indiana Public Media. I encourage you to support the next generation of journalists by supporting WTIU.
Welcome back to Indiana News Desk. Nurses want lawmakers to consider how burnout and turnover leads to high healthcare costs for hospitals and patients. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Abigail Roman reports the state's Nurses Association is advocating for transparency and a chance to be a part of the decision-making process for staffing plans.
The Indiana State Nurses Association submitted written testimony last week to the state's Healthcare Costs Oversight Task Force, saying that improving working conditions for nurses could reduce overall healthcare costs. The ISNA is asking lawmakers to reintroduce a bill from last session that requires hospitals to establish staffing councils that include working nurses in the development of staffing plans. The bill also prohibits hospitals from requiring nurses to work mandatory overtime.
As facilities cut nurses, it leads to further nurse shortages because patient-to-nurse ratios increase and longer work hours are usually required, and nurses then suffer from burnout.
Cook says these safeguards could prevent the turnover that leads to higher costs.
We think that putting these types of measures in place will allow nurses to have a better work-life balance and will address nurse burnout and keep them in their jobs.
For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Abigail Ruman.
Bloomington leaders say they want to make the city better for bikers and pedestrians. A recent collision on the Beeline Trail raises questions about how to keep both groups safe on mixed-use paths. Our Ethan Sandwise takes a look at the intersection of infrastructure and enforcement.
Bloomington has received a gold ranking from the League of American Bicyclists 9 years in a row. But some feel like the city has further to go.
Security camera footage shows Amanda Whitaker walking with her friends on the Beeline Trail August 18. A cyclist who is speeding down the Grimes overpass runs straight into her.
And we're trying to get back over. Yeah. So I had a partially collapsed lung on the left side, a left rib fracture, a concussion, and then just multiple contusions.
An officer arrived 20 minutes later to question witnesses.
He said basically any sort of criminal charges would have to be intentional.
The cyclist who told police he was homeless violated state law by riding without brakes, a Class C misdemeanor on par with a speeding ticket. Still, the officer sent the cyclist on his way without a citation.
And if people saw more enforcement and ramifications of not following the rules of the road, like you get your bike taken away or you'll get a citation or something like that, then maybe, that can help to decrease events like this in the future.
How common are these events, and just how stringently does the BPD enforce bike laws? BPD spokesman Ryan Pedigo declined an interview to talk about the bicycle crash. He also declined to talk about enforcing bicycle laws in general. Pedigo did confirm that no citation was issued in Whitaker's case and says the department rarely issues citations to cyclists. To find out how often that actually happens, the Records Division says it would have to go through every citation issued by the department individually to check which involved bikes, a process that would be, quote, very time-consuming. Not every incident gets reported, but city officials say pedestrian-cyclist collisions are uncommon.
It is, as far as I'm aware, the first report I've heard of that type of collision.
In contrast, there were almost 3,400 car collisions in Bloomington between September 2022 and 2023, including 62 with pedestrians and 43 with bikes. Some, like Rosenbarger, would rather prioritize preventive over punitive solutions.
We have to be cautious of how much we rely on enforcement in terms of different outcomes for different members of our community.
Whitaker agrees that infrastructure changes might reduce, if not prevent, collisions like hers.
I feel like the multi-use trails should have better signage, should have lines to delineate between biking and pedestrians.
The Parks Department is talking about adding a line, a center line on the Beeline, and that wouldn't prevent a person from driving over the center line or bicycling over or walking over it, but it is a design cue that people tend to follow.
It's just unfortunate that it happened. That said, there is a silver lining that it is bringing up questions that probably should have been brought up earlier on how we best prioritized both pedestrian and cyclist safety.
Duncan says the best solution to reduce traffic on the Beeline is by creating separated paths for bikers.
If we built more protected infrastructure for those folks to get from north to south, I have a good feeling that a lot of the crowded areas, a lot of those congested areas on the Beeline, it would even out and you would see less traffic there and more traffic in other areas of the city.
I would say as a transportation planner, our recommendation is to separate out modes. A challenge with the Beeline is there isn't an alternative.
Around 1.8% of Bloomingtonians say they bike for their daily commute. That's about 1,500 people, according to census estimates. The Department of Public Works maintains about 237 miles of roadway. The City Parks Department, by comparison, maintains 15 miles of recreational and multi-use paths. For Indiana News Desk, I'm Ethan Sandweiss.
A place where you can shop vintage clothing and play with adoptable cats is coming to Bloomington's east side. Isabel Hook has this report.
Sydney Leeper and Clarissa Winters own the Cat's Closet, a vintage clothing store and cat adoption center. For Winters, owning a thrift store is her dream job. She has traveled to cat cafes all over the Midwest.
So I knew that I wanted to incorporate the two things that I love the most, and hopefully that would translate well to Bloomington.
The idea to open a shop came during the pandemic, after the twosome visited a cat cafe.
We did a lot of thrifting, and we would just go and feed the stray cats because there wasn't a whole lot else to do. So we just kind of fell in love with both of those aspects.
The store is Black and queer owned, something that Leeper and Winters didn't see in town. They hope that it becomes more than just a shop, but a place to bring people together.
I hope that we can kind of become almost like a community center where people come for various activities.
The store holds 8 to 12 adoptable cats and has clothing for children and adults. For Indiana News Desk, I'm Isabel Hook.
The Indiana-Kentucky men's basketball series is officially back on, but fans will have to wait a while until the storied programs meet on the court. The schools announced this week a 4-game series starting in 2025, running through 2028. 2 games will be at Rupp Arena in Lexington, Kentucky, 1 at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis, and 1 at Simon Scott Assembly Hall in Bloomington. Well, the Indiana football team won't be playing this weekend, but the next time they take the field, they'll do it with a new offensive coordinator. Head coach Tom Allen fired Walt Bell following last weekend's 44-17 loss to Maryland. Rod Carey was promoted to offensive coordinator for the rest of the season.
There's nothing you can do midseason as far as setup. The setup is the setup. The offense is the offense. And so what you're trying to do is get us to run those plays better and maybe do it with a different little flair.
That's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana News Desk is made possible in part by Smithville, fiber internet, security solutions, and voice in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Mallard Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. Rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.